Hey guys, tonight we slip back to the pale glow of pre-dawn in ancient Rome, when the city is still wrapped in mist and the distant clang of legionnaires' boots echoes through empty streets. You probably won't survive this morning routine. Imagine shivering on a cold marble seat surrounded by strangers, yet here we are. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're tuning in from and what your local time is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake in your cramped tenement room just before the first roosters crow, the faint glow of oil lamps casting elongated shadows on cracked walls. You swing your legs over a simple wooden cot, probably imported cedar if you're lucky, and shuffle your way through narrow corridors, toes grazing rough stone floors still cool from the night air. Historians still argue whether these insula apartments were originally meant to house artisans or low-ranking officials, but either way, your neighbor's snores and creaks fill the hall. Outside, a chorus of early risers begins, a baker striking dough, a water carrier rattling ceramic jars, and a group of centurions clumping in hobnailed sandals toward their barracks. You catch the rhythmic thud of their boots, legionnaires routinely drilled at dawn to keep discipline razor-sharp, and wonder if they've ever tripped over a loose cobblestone. Probably Romans loved paving stones almost as much as they loved to complain about them. Your first stop is the communal latrine, a long bench of polished marble riddled with evenly spaced holes. You settle onto your designated seat and feel the slight warmth of water coursing beneath. Mainstream fact: these latrines often featured continuous aqueduct-fed water flow to carry waste away, a remarkable engineering feat that kept the city humming. Yet here's the quirky part: instead of toilet paper, Romans shared a sponge on a stick, rinsed in vinegar between uses. You gag slightly at the thought, watered-down grape vinegar isn't exactly minty fresh. Joke 1, you probably think modern plumbing is civilized, but at least you don't need to carry your loose sponge to the fountain each morning. Sponge logistics, anyone? While you attend to nature's call, you overhear laughter echoing off the stone walls, graffiti scrawled behind you boasts of gladiators and love affairs, some so risque they'd make a Vestal blush. Historians still argue whether such public scribbles were acts of rebellion or just bored citizens passing time. Either way, those crude sketches definitely spice up your morning routine. As you descend from your perch, an attendant offers up a ladle of scented oil to rub on your hands, frankincense mingled with rose petals imported from Syria. Fringe tidbit: some Romans believed that these aromatic oils warded off evil spirits lurking near latrines. You arch an eyebrow, evil spirits? More like evil smells, but you indulge anyway, because social status demands it. Joke 2, you may not be exorcising demons, but you're definitely exorcising yesterday's lunch. Smells like triumph. And fish sauce. Next, you wander through the courtyard toward a communal fountain fed by the newly completed Aqua Claudia aqueduct. Water drips from a carved lion's head spout into a shallow basin where women in simple tunics scrub laundry and children splash noisily. Mainstream fact: the Aqua Claudia stretched over 45 miles from its source, delivering around 50 million gallons of water daily. Yet despite this abundance, you must stand in a line just to fill your clay jug. Romans loved their queues almost as much as their aqueducts. At the fountain's edge, you exchange nods with a burly cobbler. He's polishing sandals made for a prefect's daughter, leather so fine it would make modern shoemakers jealous. His workshop sits under a low arch, the scent of fresh hide mixing with damp stone. Fringe tidbit: legend holds that some artisans carved tiny faces into the soles of sandals to ward off bad luck. No one's sure if that actually improved foot comfort or just gave you odd tan lines. Joke 3, if you ever complain about fast fashion, just remember it used to take 3 days to handcraft a single pair of shoes, and you'd stand in line for water while you waited. Talk about first world problems. You hoist your filled jug on your shoulder and pause to take in the awakening city. Merchants begin unrolling cloth in the forum, but dawn's light still glimmers off marble columns and bronze statues. You inhale deep smoke from charcoal braziers, the faint brine of the Tiber, and the ever-present tang of fermented garum wafting from a nearby cookshop. Historians still argue whether garum's popularity was due to its umami punch or a lack of dietary alternatives, but most agree it could mask nearly any unpleasant aroma. As the city fully comes to life, you can't help but marvel at the delicate balance: communal latrines engineered for efficiency, oil rubs scented to impress, and monumental aqueducts delivering water for everything from baths to fountains. Yet beneath this polished veneer lies the ever-present threat of disease, cramped living quarters, and the constant hum of politics. You step away from the fountain, ready to blend into the bustling crowd, but that's for the next part of our story. Remember that sponge on a stick, you'll be seeing more of it later. You slip past the fountain's edge and step onto the wide, worn slabs of the Roman Forum, where the city's pulse quickens with every passing footstep. You weave between merchants unrolling bolts of dyed wool and bakers hauling baskets of still warm bread, your toga brushing against wooden carts creaking under the weight of amphorae. Remember that sponge on a stick from the latrine? It's hardly the only communal item you're passing around this morning. Mainstream fact: the forum's marble paving dates back to Julius Caesar's renovations in 54 BCE, replacing earlier wooden walkways to better withstand the throngs during market days. Yet despite the gleaming stone beneath your sandals, you find yourself sidestepping puddles of spilled olive oil and the occasional goat tethered to a vendor's stall. A shrill horn from a speeding chariot draws your attention. You hug the edge of a colonnade as a pair of painted wheels thunder past, dust swirling at your ankles. Fringe tidbit: some chariot racers would paint tiny eyes on their wheels to ward off evil spirits believed to lurk in the dust, though most agree it was just showmanship. Historians still argue whether these eye motifs actually terrified rivals or just distracted spectators with their bright colors. Joke 1. If you thought your morning commute was rough, imagine dodging a 4-horse chariot while clutching a basket of eggs and knowing that, yes, that toga could totally get caught in the wheel. You catch a whiff of wood smoke mingled with fresh figs as you approach a stall draped in faded red cloth. The vendor grins, revealing a gold tooth sparkling like a miniature sun. He holds out a cluster of figs stuffed with cheese and honey, wrapped in grape leaves. You sample one and feel the sweet goose slide over your tongue. Mainstream fact: Romans imported figs from North Africa, prized for their sweetness and believed to aid digestion after heavy meals. Yet behind the stall, you notice half-empty amphorae carved with the insignia of Leptis magna, exotic olive oil from what is now Libya. Joke 2, you realize that even ancient Romans couldn't resist farm-to-table trends. Though their idea of fast food still involves waiting in line under the Mediterranean sun. A flock of pigeons takes wing as a pair of toga-clad philosophers stride past, deep in debate. You overhear snippets: the nature of virtue, whether the republic endures. Historians still argue whether these street corner discussions truly shaped policy or were merely rhetorical exercises for bored elites. You sidestep a young orator balancing on a crate, his voice echoing off weathered columns. Fringe tidbit: some orators carried wormwood leaves to discreetly mask food odors during long speeches, though most audience members swore they detected a faint bitter tang anyway. You pivot toward an open courtyard where a troupe of musicians tunes their lyres. The soft pluck of strings contrasts with the louder clamor around you. A vendor nearby sells boiled chickpeas from a clay pot, steam curling like lazy serpents. You pluck a handful, pop one into your mouth, and grind your teeth on a stray chickpea skin. Joke 3. You thought street snacks were hygienic until you realized that these chickpeas have traveled through more hands than a toga at a senator's feast. As midday approaches, the sun climbs higher, warming the fluted columns of the Basilica Emilia. You pause in its shadow, eyeing the steps where judges once presided over disputes. Today, merchants haggle over prices rather than litigants presenting sworn oaths. Mainstream fact: the Basilica Emilia served as a central law court and commercial hub, its porphyry floors reflecting the glow of midday. You push on, elbowing through a knot of travelers from distant provinces. There's a Nubian trader with brightly patterned textiles and a Gaulish merchant sporting a cloak of embroidered wool. Fringe tidbit: some foreign traders deposited coins in the Temple of Saturn as good luck offerings before setting up stalls, hoping to appease the gods and boost sales. Scholars still debate whether these offerings were genuine piety or an early form of marketing expense. Your nostrils flare as the scent of fresh bread mingles with the acrid taste of nearby smoke. A baker pulls a loaf from a brick oven and offers you the edge, crust still crackling. You tear off a small piece, savoring the warmth. Joke 4. You might complain about preheating your oven, but at least you don't have to stand over hot coals bouncing dough on a flat rock. First world breakfast problems, indeed. You continue weaving, passing under a triumphal arch festooned with carved reliefs of conquest. Soldiers march past, their shields clinking and sandals clopping in unison. You fall into step for a moment, feeling oddly safe in their formation. Until a mule breaks free from a pack, scattering a basket of figs across your sandals. Mainstream fact: Roman mules were prized for their endurance and used extensively in cargo transport. Some could carry up to 200 pounds across mountain passes. Yet when startled, they were just as likely to bolt headlong into the nearest crowd. As you retrieve figs from your feet, you notice a young schoolmaster offering chalk tablets to passing children for lessons in reading and arithmetic. Fringe tidbit: some educators taught using wax tablets instead of papyrus, believing the tactile method improved memory, though most students resented wiping out mistakes far more than scribbling them. Joke 5. Imagine mastering multiplication only to realize you'll have to smear your hard work off a wax slab. Talk about erasing your mistakes taken literally. Sweat beads on your brow as you approach the northern exit of the forum, or a cluster of donkey carts awaits to ferry goods toward the markets by the river. You pat the coarse bridle of a patient donkey and mount the wooden cart, the boards creaking under your weight. Historians still argue whether most Romans preferred carts over porters, given the extra responsibility of steering an obstinate animal. You lean back on a bale of straw, catching your breath. Around you, the forum's chaos slows for a moment, vendors tallying coins, philosophers retracting scrolls, and citizens pausing to chat under splayed olive trees. You breathe deeply, inhaling the mingled scents of spice, sweat, and sun-warmed stone. Joke 6. And to think, all you wanted was a quiet stroll, no chariots, no mules, no 36 vendors shouting prices in 6 different languages. Yet here you are, living the ancient dream commute. The cart lurches forward, carrying you away from the forum's crowded heart toward new adventures. But before we leave this chaotic crossroad, take a moment to recall those painted chariot wheels, tiny eyes meant to spook away evil. Whether they actually frightened off anything more than pigeons remains anyone's guess. As the dust settles behind you, you realize that this commute, noisier and odoriferous than any modern subway ride, has offered a glimpse into Rome's vibrant daily life. Communal chatter, sensory overload, and a rhythm all its own. And soon, you'll step off this cart and dive into marketplace bargaining. but that's for section 3. You climb down from the donkey cart and step into a sprawling market square ringed by low stone porticos and wooden booths swaying in the morning breeze. You pause to inhale the riot of scents: briny olives curing in earthenware, the sharp tang of vinegar from barrels of garum, and the sweet breeze carrying faint wafts of cinnamon and clove from distant provinces. Remember that sponge on a stick you carried through the latrine? Here, nearly every item passes from hand to hand, and you can practically taste the barter in the air. Mainstream fact: this central food market, known as the Macellum, was established under Emperor Augustus around 2 BCE and featured hundreds of stalls dedicated to perishables and specialty goods. Yet despite the grandeur of marble columns overhead, you duck under a low tarp and find yourself haggling in the mud with farmers who arrived at dawn to sell last night's olive harvest. You approach a wooden stall piled high with plump green and black olives glistening in olive oil. The vendor, a stout woman with a scar over her eyebrow, sizes you up and names a price in sestertii. You purse your lips and retort with half that amount, gesturing to a leaking jar, to let her know you'll risk a spoilt batch if she won't budge. Fringe tidbit: some olive merchants secretly added brine from old amphorae to boost saltiness and hide bitter fruit, a trick only veteran tasters could detect. Historians still argue whether such practices were officially tolerated or quietly condemned by city inspectors. Joke 1: you gripe about supermarket prices today, but at least you don't have to argue over olives in the middle of a muddy square, though, to be fair, those olives are probably fresher than most organic labels you see now. With a nod, she dips a wooden spoon into a smaller pot, offering you a taste. You crunch down, savoring the firm flesh and a hint of thyme. Satisfied, you slide her a handful of coins and strap the jar to your leather satchel. Next, you sidle over to a long row of clay amphorae labeled Garum Optimum. A burly fishmonger hefts a ladle of the fermented fish sauce toward your trembling hand, warning you with a grin. You brave a sniff and catch a powerful punch of umami that makes your eyes water. Mainstream fact: garum was produced by layering fish, salt, and herbs in vats and left to ferment for weeks, creating a condiment as ubiquitous in Roman kitchens as ketchup is today. Yet locals swore by different grades: some garum hailed from Cádiz in Spain, others from the coast of Britannia. You inquire about the price difference and learn that jars stamped Carthago Nova command double sestertii for their smoother flavor. Fringe tidbit: wealthy gourmands sometimes tinted their garum with saffron to signal prestige, despite the cost rivaling that of fine wine. You wrinkle your nose, wondering if anyone can actually taste saffron beneath that pungent aroma. Historians still argue whether saffron garums were culinary innovations or simple vanity projects by the elite. Joke 2: if you think putting gold flakes in modern gin is extravagant, try paying extra for fish sauce dyed yellow. Your ancestors might scoff at your craft cocktails. You move on to a low stall draped with burlap sacks of spices: cumin from the deserts of Arabia, peppercorns from Kerala, and nutmeg whispered to come from the distant Isles of the Blessed. The spice trader, a pale-eyed Greek with a silver hoop in his ear, presses a fragrant pouch into your palm. You inhale deeply, imagining how these tiny seeds could transform a simple stew into something fit for a patrician feast. Mainstream fact: Rome imported over 50 tons of pepper annually by the 1st century AD, fueling a spice trade that spanned continents. Yet despite such volume, you still haggle tooth and nail to shave a few denarii off the price. You ask about payment methods, and he flashes a codex of tally marks on wax tablets, each line representing a debt owed by some absentee landowner. Fringe tidbit: some spice merchants offered credit notes known as chirographa, early IOUs written on papyrus and traded among elites as quasi-currency. You squint at the confusing symbols, thankful you brought actual coins. Historians still argue whether this credit network laid the groundwork for modern banking or simply created more headaches for poor bartering folk. Joke 3. You thought splitting a dinner bill was awkward until you've tried splitting papyrus IOUs in the middle of a fish market. Talk about unclear payment terms. Satisfied with your haul of olives, garum, and spices, you sling the satchel over your shoulder and step aside to let a procession of mule trains pass. A young slave girl offers to carry your jars on a wicker tray, another reminder of the social hierarchies woven into every transaction. You nod in thanks, handing her a handful of fragments from earlier purchases. As you exit the market's perimeter, you glance back at the rows of stalls, each one a microcosm of Rome's vast empire, vendors shouting in half a dozen tongues, the clink of bronze coins, and the ever-present undercurrent of negotiation. You feel the weight of your satchel and the excitement of new flavors awaiting tonight's supper or tomorrow's morning routine. This bustling market taught you that even in a world without price tags or barcodes, people found ways to measure value and to haggle with relentless determination. Next, we'll explore communal bathhouse rituals where these very spices sometimes scented the steam. You step from the bustling market square into a shaded courtyard framed by lofty columns and inhale the faint hiss of steam drifting from arched doorways. Ahead lies the communal bathhouse, a grand complex murmuring with soothing warmth. You shed your dusty satchel at a marble bench and wipe sweat from your brow before ducking under the lintel, greeted by moist air scented faintly with olive oil and crushed bay leaves. Mainstream fact. Most Roman bathhouses, or thermae, relied on the hypocaust system, underfloor heating powered by wood-fired furnaces, to circulate hot air beneath raised tiles, keeping floors pleasantly warm. Yet as you tiptoe across heated mosaics toward the caldarium, you notice corners where tiles have cracked, evidence of uneven heat distribution. Historians still argue whether maintenance crews prioritized public hygiene or merely patched visible damage to avoid elite complaints. You press your fingertips against the warm walls and feel tiny cracks where steam escapes, like a muted hiss of contented bathers within. Fringe tidbit: some patrons tucked sprigs of lavender into the grout to freshen the air, believing the fragrance repelled mosquitoes drawn by heat, though most entomologists today doubt lavender's mosquito-deterring powers. Joke 1. You may grumble about your electric heater's odd noises, but at least you don't have to slap steam vents with bay leaves to chase away imaginary bugs. Ahead, a throng of bathers in loose towels drifts from chamber to chamber. You slip into the tepidarium, a room of mild warmth where marble benches invite social lounging. You choose a spot beside a rotund butcher chatting with a toga-clad senator about goat cheese quality. Their voices echo against high vaults as water splashes somewhere beyond. Mainstream fact: the tepidarium served as a transitional space to acclimate bathers before the intense heat of the caldarium, helping prevent shock. Its walls were often lined with polished marble to hold warmth. Yet the room's acoustics encouraged gossip as much as relaxation. Historians still argue whether bathhouse chatter shaped political alliances or simply passed the time. You dip a toe into a shallow plunge pool fed by lukewarm water, feeling the tile smooth edges beneath your skin. Fringe tidbit: some bathhouses added powdered goatskin ash to pool water, believing the minerals soothed achy joints. You wonder if those ancient spa-goers would appreciate modern Epsom salts. Joke 2. Imagine turning up at a wellness retreat to soak in goat ash water. Today's influencers might call it ancient exfoliating mineral mud. From the tepidarium, you wander into the caldarium's heady embrace. Steam swirls around Corinthian columns as you inhale the moist warmth, your breathing slowing. A bronze basin of scented oil stands ready. You dip a finger and smear the golden liquid across your forearm, muscles relaxing under its silky coating. Mainstream fact: patrons often applied oil before scraping it off with a curved metal strigil, removing sweat and dead skin in one ritual swipe. Yet opinions differ on hygiene. Some believe the strigil cleaned thoroughly, while others complained of painful scrapes. Historians still argue whether the strigil's origin lay in Greek athletic practices or was purely a Roman innovation. You hand your oil-coated skin to a portly attendant wielding a strigil. The metal edges hiss as they scrape away grime, an oddly ticklish sensation mixed with relief. Fringe tidbit. Wealthy bathers sometimes requested strigils made of silver or even gold, believing precious metals conferred antibacterial properties despite scant evidence. Joke 3. You might toss out your loofah after this. Nothing says self-care like being skimmed by a medieval cheese knife. Cleaned and oiled, you settle onto a heated marble bench, leaning back to admire guest after guest parading through the steam. A toga flaps as a retired centurion glides by, chest puffed with pride. You overhear him whisper to a friend about engineered water pressure worthy of Jupiter himself. Behind you, a young lady dips her hand in a chilled pool and gasps, a reminder that the frigidarium lurks ahead. Mainstream fact: the frigidarium contained cold water pools meant to close pores after the heat, stimulating circulation. Bathers believed the shock enhanced vigor. Yet some bathhouse manuals warned that sudden temperature changes could trigger health issues. Historians still argue whether mixed temperature bathing was safe or simply a myth perpetuated by spa proprietors. You stand and move toward the frigidarium, passing under a vaulted arch adorned with mosaic scenes of Neptune calming waves. Fringe tidbit: a few bathhouses featured small fountains of rosewater in the frigidarium, meant for perfumed rinsing, though most visitors found the rosewater too delicate to cut through lingering garum scents. Joke 4. You think your morning shower is fancy with scented body wash? Try feeling floral after 4 hours of fermented fish sauce wafting around you. Diving into the cold plunge, you gasp as icy water floods your senses, muscles jolting awake. The chill ripples down to your bones, invigorating and slightly alarming. You tread water like a startled duck, then press your face under to emerge triumphant and shivering. Sweat beads from the hot rooms mingle with goosebumps from the cold pool. You drape a damp towel over your shoulders and sit by the frigidarium's edge, listening to other bathers' contented sighs. A philosopher recites lines of verse under his breath, a guard hums a marching tune, and water trickles from a carved dolphin spout. Mainstream fact: bathhouse mosaics often featured aquatic themes, dolphins, fish, and sea nymphs, to complement the water environment. Skilled artisans spent months laying tiny tesserae. Yet the expense meant only major urban centers hosted the most lavish mosaics, while smaller towns made do with painted plaster. Historians still argue whether elaborate bath decor reflected civic pride or simply aimed to outdo rival neighborhoods. Picking up your sponge on a stick, yes, you kept it handy. You rinse your arms in a basin nearby before strolling toward the exit corridor. Fringe tidbit: some bathhouses offered communal sponges dipped in scented water rather than vinegar, an innovation credited to women of the imperial court. Joke 5. You may loathe shared office equipment, but at least you don't have to worry about whose armpits touched your sponge each morning. You wrap your damp hair in a simple band of linen and rejoin the flow of bathers stepping into daylight. Emerging onto sun-warmed cobbles, you feel cleansed yet oddly sticky from oil residue. You squeeze your tunic at the shoulders, baseball capped by embarrassment or post-bath bliss, you can't decide which. As you stroll away, you glance back at the bathhouse's ornate facade, columns towering like silent sentinels of hygiene and social spectacle. You carry with you more than clean skin, a sense of shared ritual, a fleeting community bound by steam and strigil. And soon, you'll follow those same veterans and senators into gladiator wheat fields. Plenty of sweat remains to be earned. You step into a dimly lit tavern off a narrow side street, the air thick with savory steam and the faint curl of wood smoke from a recessed hearth. You settle onto a worn wooden stool, eyeing a low table strewn with ceramic dishes heaped with curiosities that would make modern taste buds quiver. Tonight's menu highlights Rome's culinary quirks: dormice fattened on chestnuts, fermented fish sauce of every grade, and even a pastry dusted with crushed edible flowers. You probably won't believe these flavors, but here you are, spoon in hand. Mainstream fact: wealthy Romans often raised dormice in special terracotta jars called gleraria, feeding them walnuts and chestnuts to plump their bodies before roasting. The practice dates back to the 2nd century BCE as a symbol of elite status. Yet despite the gastronomic prestige, you notice only a few jars on the crowded shelf. Historians still argue whether dormice were an everyday snack or strictly reserved for banquets and festivals. The tavern keeper arrives, presenting a shallow bowl of bright red dormice glazed in honey and poppy seed. You pick one up by its tail, examining the golden sheen before daring a bite. The flesh is surprisingly tender, with a nutty sweetness that clashes with your internal protest. Fringe tidbit: some gourmands sprinkled pine nuts inside the dormice before roasting to add crunch. Though critics swore the hidden nuts sometimes dislodged and scratched throats. Joke 1: you thought modern fusion cuisine was risky. At least no one's ever tried stuffing quail with chestnuts in your neighborhood bistro, yet. You set the empty plate aside and accept a small amphora of garum optimo, its stopper sealed with wax. A tiny ladle scoops out a dark amber sauce, and you drizzle it over a chunk of air-dried ham. The pungent aroma of fermented fish washes over your senses. Salty, tangy, almost meaty in its umami hit. Mainstream fact: garum was produced by layering fish guts, salt, and herbs in vats exposed to the sun, fermenting for weeks. The richest version sold for as much as 3 minae per jar, making them prized imports across the empire. Yet despite such renown, many common citizens mixed their own private garum at home, blending scraps and salt in small amphorae. Historians still argue whether homemade versions matched the quality of factory-made sauces or merely undercut professional producers. You lean in to inhale the garum's powerful bouquet, then dip a piece of bread to scoop up the golden oil on top. Fringe tidbit: wealthy diners sometimes colored their garum with saffron or ground beetles to achieve a deep red hue, believing the color signified potency. Most experts agree the additives did little beyond stain linens. Joke 2: you may have paid extra for artisanal olive oil, but at least you didn't spring for beetle-infused fish sauce. Your laundry would hate you. Next arrives a platter of more familiar fare: olives, cheese, and honeyed melon. But between each are small plates of stuffed dormice, jars labeled by region: from Britannia, from Hibernia, from Carthago. You sample one stuffed with peppercorns and lovage, the spice quick to tingle your tongue. Mainstream fact: Romans prized pepper so highly that black peppercorns were sometimes used as currency. Archaeobotanical evidence shows up to 2 million peppercorns imported annually by the 1st century CE. Yet for many, even a pinch was lavish, reserved for dishes at the governor's table. Historians still argue whether widespread pepper use influenced dietary health or merely signaled wealth. You pause to sip diluted wine mixed half and half with boiled water cooled to room temperature. Fringe tidbit: some diners added crushed dormouse liver to wine as a fertility charm, though most physicians warned against the practice for fear of indigestion. Joke 3: you complain about adding ice cubes these days, but freezing grape juice would seem like magic compared to infusing dormouse liver into your vintage Chianti. Between bites, you lean back and watch the tavern's mosaic floor, scenes of Dionysus reclining among grapes. A servant scuttles by with a platter of boiled snails and a vine leaf parcel, another fringe delicacy you're told to try. You tentatively pop one snail into your mouth. The texture is chewy, the flavor grassy with a hint of earth. Mainstream fact: Romans collected snails from farmland and vineyards, believed aphrodisiacs, and seasoned them with herbs like mint and coriander. Yet some diners swore the snails retained too much soil residue, making them a questionable treat. Historians still argue whether snail farming was widespread or simply opportunistic harvesting in the wild. The tavern's corner bustles with an orphan youth, mixing a crudely fermented dessert of barley mash and honey. You taste a spoonful, tangy and rustic, like an ancient granola bar gone wild. Fringe tidbit: some desserts featured crushed rose petals for color and fragrance, though most petals wilted in the mash, rendering the effect purely symbolic. Joke 4. You might post about your acai bowls, but at least they come without half-digested grains and wilted flour bits. Your final course arrives: a petite pastry of semolina flour, fried in olive oil and dipped in grape syrup. The sweetness lingers against the aftertaste of garum still clinging to your palate. You lean forward to accept a final glass of Mulsum wine sweetened with honey and warmed by a sprig of laurel. As you sip, notes of pine and citrus drift in, coaxing your breath to slow. Mainstream fact: Mulsum was a common aperitif in Roman feasts, often served before richer courses to stimulate appetite. Evidence shows it was enjoyed by all classes, from slaves to senators. Yet recipe variations abounded. Historians still argue whether adding herbs improved digestion or merely muddled the wine's natural flavor. You set the empty cup aside and exhale deeply, mind swirling with unfamiliar tastes and textures. The tavern's flickering lamp casts dancing shadows on rough-hewn beams as patrons murmur contentedly. You touch your belly. Surprisingly, it isn't upset, proof that ancient gastric fortitude rivaled modern probiotics. Joke 5. You may swear by kombucha now, but when you think of fermented food, remember the Romans who sipped fish sauce like fine whiskey. Cheers to bold ancestral brews. You stand, adjusting your satchel's bulge of jars and spices. The scent of honey still lingers on your fingertips, underground in your clothes. You step back into the sunlit street, senses humming from the culinary adventure. You've tasted Rome's boldest creations: dormice, garum, snails, and more, and survived to tell the tale. As you walk toward the next scene, the distant roar of hammering draws your attention. Toga drapes and culinary capers behind you. Ahead, stone slabs rise for the next lesson in etiquette. And that's where we'll head next. Learning how to wear a toga without tripping over centuries of tradition. You slip into the shaded portico outside a teacher's house, the afternoon sun softened by high, vine-covered arches. Before you lies the next challenge of Roman life: mastering the toga. You probably won't survive this unrolling ritual without a helper. Imagine wrestling 6 yards of wool while everyone watches, but here you are, arms aching and fingers fumbling. Mainstream fact: the toga, a semicircular piece of heavy wool cloth up to 20 feet in circumference, was the formal garment reserved exclusively for male Roman citizens. Wearing it marked you as part of the civic body. Yet despite its status, you notice its coarse weave itching your skin, a reminder that citizenship came with its own fashion penalties. Historians still argue whether the toga's shape symbolized the moon's crescent or was simply a practical way to drape unwieldy fabric. You begin by folding one edge over your left shoulder, creating a loose loop under your right arm, then sweeping the remaining fabric across your chest and around your back in a single, deliberate motion. Fringe tidbit: some pleading experts sewed tiny lead weights into the hem to keep folds in place during windy forum debates, though most agree those weights could leave bruises if you leaned against a stone column. Joke 1. You thought your bathrobe was comfortable? Try shimmying into a scratchy blanket that doubles as a civic uniform and pray you don't trip over the trailing hem. A fellow citizen steps by, offering advice in clipped Latin. Raise the sinus higher for senatorial gravitas. You adjust the drape at his suggestion, lifting the large pouch of fabric over your chest. The extra bulk feels like a built-in pillow, useful for impromptu naps but disastrous if you must dash across the piazza. Mainstream fact. The sinus, the pouch-like fold over the chest, allowed patricians to store small items like money or boutique shopping lists, though many bragged it was purely decorative. Historians still argue whether the sinus was intended for storage or solely a status symbol showing off fine weaving. Your fingers fumble as you try to pin the folds with a fibula, a decorative brooch shaped like a boat. Fringe tidbit. Wealthy Romans sometimes commissioned gilded fibulae shaped like mythical creatures or miniature sculptures, believing the visual flair enhanced their dignity. Unfortunately, these pins could snag on togas of passing neighbors, causing unexpected public entanglements. Joke 2, you complain about losing a single sock, but try keeping track of a dozen folds secured by a decorative pin. One wrong move and you're flashing your tunic to the entire Senate. You stand up, pressing your toga's trailing border, called the vallus, into its proper crescent sweep behind you. Each step becomes a calculated glide to prevent the hem from catching on doorframes or cartwheels. You brush past a group of children who titter, daring each other to yank at your drape like a modern prank. Mainstream fact, the vallus, or overfold behind the back, signified maturity. Boys transition from the simple toga pretexta, with a purple border, to the plain toga virilis around age 16. Yet you notice some older men still clinging to the pretexta edges, insisting it reminded them of adolescence. Historians still argue whether the age transition was strictly enforced or loosely observed in frontier provinces. You recall your ladle of garum from the tavern and brace yourself. One misstep, and that precious sauce could splash onto pristine wool. Fringe tidbit. Some urban citizens coated the bottom of their togas with lanolin derived from sheep's wool to repel stains. The slippery oilment spill simply slid off, though critics complained it made togas too shiny for solemn occasions. Joke 3, you may balk at dry clean only tags, but imagine charging a slave 20 denarii just to launder your oily toga. Your bank balance would need healing just as badly as your garment. A passing magistrate eyes your drape critically and mutters under his breath. You adjust the horizontal plica on your shoulder, a small fold that, when set precisely, declared your rank in the cursus honorum. Higher officials boasted larger plicae. You tucked yours into a smaller tuck, hoping no one mistakes you for a newly elected consul. Mainstream fact, the plica was the series of horizontal folds across the shoulder and upper arm. Its width varied by social standing, with consular togas featuring up to 10 distinct pleats. Historians still argue whether these pleats were standardized by law or evolved through unofficial fashion trends. Your contraption finally settles into place, though the wool's weight makes you sway like a boat on gentle waves. You hitch the vallus over your left arm and straighten your posture, reminding yourself that every deliberate gesture signals authority. Fringe tidbit, some senators hired professional togatores, trained toga dressers, to assist them each morning, carrying trays of pins and folding boards. Their job description echoes today's personal stylists, albeit with more wool and less glamour. Joke 4, you cringe at hiring a barista for your coffee habit, but consider the mental relief of having someone drape 20 feet of fabric around you daily. Talk about life goals. You catch sight of your reflection in a polished bronze shield leaning against a stucco wall. The folds create an almost sculptural silhouette. Artistically impressive but functionally restrictive. You test your mobility with a cautious step, wincing as the hem brushes your calf. The toga's trademark sweep is elegant in frescoes, but in practical terms, it demands constant attention. Mainstream fact, official togas were woven from undyed white wool known as toga pura. Bleaching and whitening processes involved sulfur fumes, giving final garments a faint sulfurous odor. Yet Romans largely accepted the smell as part of civic attire. Historians still argue whether toga purification rituals served health purposes or were mere theatrical enhancements. As evening approaches, a breeze picks up, teasing the folds around your legs. You secure the valise higher to avoid tripping and head toward the forum for a narration you promised to attend. Each footstep is precise, heel down, toe lifting the hem slightly, a choreography you've practiced only moments ago. Fringe tidbit. Some politicians attached small bells to the hem of their togas, the soft tinkle announcing their arrival. Audiences claimed the sound pleased the gods, though skeptics argue it was simply good branding. Joke 5. You might hate your phone's notification chime, but at least you don't need jingle-toed trousers to remind everyone you've arrived at the party. You pause at a fountain to lift the valise and wipe a bead of sweat from your brow. Despite a day of bathing, baking, and bargaining, your toga stands nearly spotless, proof that practice does make perfect. You inhale deep, the wool's earthy aroma mingles with distant garum and roasting grain, a sensory badge of your Roman experience. Your helper awaits with the second fibula and a small mirror, ready for final adjustments before you step into the twilight forum. With that, you've conquered the toga's art, a garment equal parts garment and statement. Ready yourself. For soon you'll observe how sewers and street spills test even the finest drapery. You step from the twilight forum back onto the uneven cobbles of a side street, the glow from oil lamps flickering off puddles at your feet. As you walk, a sudden splash erupts, water and who knows what else surging from a grated drain. You leap back, toga swirling, narrowly avoiding a sludge tide that tastes faintly of yesterday's garum. Remember that sponge on a stick you toted through bathhouses? Here, you might wish it doubled as a personal shield. Mainstream fact. Beneath Rome's bustling streets ran the Cloaca Maxima, one of the world's earliest sewage systems, originally built in the 6th century BCE and later expanded under Augustus to drain marshes and carry waste into the Tiber. Yet despite its grandeur, you notice chunks of debris caught at a narrow opening, forced back onto the pavement. Historians still argue whether the Cloaca Maxima primarily managed stormwater or served as a true sanitary sewer for excrement. You skirt around a vendor whose cart has tilted into a shallow trench, olives rolling into the gutter. The vendor curses in clipped Latin, brandishing a wooden pole as if threatening the very aqueduct he worshipped hours ago. Fringe tidbit, some Romans adorned sewer covers with images of goat heads to ward off murky spirits said to dwell in the drains, though most archaeologists shrug at any spiritual efficacy. Joke 1. You thought urban rats were the only hazard underground. Turns out your morning commute could double as a surprise dunk tank for olives. A rhythmic drip echoes from a cracked wall where a lead pipe once discharged water. You peek inside, dark liquid oozes over jagged stone, mixing with dirt and a stray cabbage leaf. You inhale earthy, sour, vaguely vegetal. Fringe tidbit, informal plumbers known as fistularii roamed the sewers, plugging leaks with bundles of reeds bound in linen. Gossip claimed they sometimes pocketed scraps of ancient coins for their trouble. Historians still argue whether these itinerant repairers were officially sanctioned or operated in legal gray zones. Joke 2. You complain about your drip coffee maker's leaks, but no home appliance warranty covers random sewage surprise. Talk about full body cleaning. Ahead, the street narrows, and you spot another flooded patch, this time beneath a communal latrine's outhouse platform. You recall Section 1's cold marble seats and shared vinegar sponge. Now, waste flows past your sandals just inches away. The olfactory assault is immediate, a pungent fusion of stale urine, fermentation, and distant incense from a nearby temple. You cover your nose with your toga's valise, fumbling to keep the folds immaculate. Mainstream fact: many urban latrines discharge directly into open drains without intermediaries, relying on constant water flow to carry waste away. Yet maintenance varied by neighborhood, and blockages often caused backflow onto streets. Historians still argue whether local magistrates enforced cleaning regulations or turned a blind eye for fear of public unrest. You edge past a group of toga-clad patricians who, despite their noble rank, gingerly step around the murk. One misjudges his footing, his fibula pin snagging the lintel of a shop doorway, sending him stumbling sideways, but he rights himself before anyone notices. Fringe tidbit: wealthy citizens sometimes hired slaves to accompany them on dirty walks, armed with brooms and water flasks to mop up unsightly spills immediately. Joke 3: you think valet parking is pampering, but imagine your own personal sewer janitor trailing behind, left foot carefully, sir. The pavement slopes down toward the Tiber embankment. The scent shifts as breezes carry river spray and wafts of burning wood from ferries docked upstream. You notice a small shrine tucked beside a drain opening, offerings of garlic cloves and pieces of bread pressed into cracks. A local piety, they say, to appease Cloacina, goddess of the sewer, hoping she spares your feet from unwanted immersion. Fringe tidbit: some Romans believed whispering apologies to Cloacina before stepping over a drain prevented it from sticking to one's sandals, though skeptics argue these rituals were little more than superstitious theatrics. Joke 4: you might eye your smart shoes warily, but at least they weren't blessed by a sewer nymph before use. Imagine the confusion at squeaky clean ceremonies. You wade through a final patch of ankle-deep water near a tanner's workshop, animal hide soaking in vats of lime and oak bark extract, the byproduct draining into the street. The stench is acrid, like burnt leather mixed with sour milk. You pinch your nose and hurry past, vines curling over a nearby wall offering harmless respite. Mainstream fact: tanneries often relocated to the city's outskirts due to foul odors, yet some remained near central districts for convenient material transfer. Historians still argue whether urban zoning laws effectively segregated such trades or if economic convenience trumped public health concerns. Near the river road, you spy a fisherman rinsing nets in a shallow channel carved into the embankment, smacking them rhythmically to dislodge debris. He offers you a handful of small fish still glistening. You sample one, its briny taste oddly reassuring amidst the other flavors. Fringe tidbit: in some docks, sailors shunned fresh fish deemed too clean, believing the river's natural bacteria tempered the catch's flavor. You wonder if modern sushi aficionados would agree. Joke 5: you brag about eating local catch, but ancient Romans took fresh from the river to a whole new level, dirt exclusion optional. As you approach a wooden bridge spanning a narrow rill, you pause at a wedding ring etched into the bridge support. Locals whisper that a bride once lost her dowry in the flood tides, and placing a ring there commemorates cautionary matrimony. You trace the worn symbol with your fingertip before stepping over the railing, mindful of your clean toga. The bridge dumps you onto the river road, where cartwheels have carved deep ruts and mud glistens under lantern light. You shake out your ham and inhale a lungful of night air tinged with lavender from a passing libation cart. Despite the grime underfoot and the occasional sewer surge, you feel oddly connected to this city's lifeblood, waste and water intertwined in a delicate dance of engineering and everyday survival. You glance back at the network of drains and latrines you've passed, marveling at the ambition and imperfection of Rome's sanitation. It's a world of flow and reflux, where a broken pipe can reroute your entire evening, and where superstitions cling as stubbornly as the sludge under your sandals. You step onto a dry patch and adjust your togas vallis, ready to leave sewage behind, for now. But keep that mental image of ancient spills. Soon we'll witness the dawn's first public flogging, another spectacle proving Rome's knack for blending order and disorder. You slip through shadowed alleys as the first pale fingers of dawn stretch across the sky, guided by the distant clang of a bronze bell echoing through empty streets. Ahead, a crowd begins to gather in a stone-paved plaza framed by temple steps and vendor stalls still shuttered. You probably won't survive witnessing a public punishment without wincing, but here you are, curious and slightly queasy. Remember that sponge on a stick? You might wish it doubled as a makeshift bandage. Mainstream fact: public floggings in Rome often took place at dawn to deter crime and demonstrate magistrates' authority, with victims tied to wooden stakes before being struck by rods or whips. Yet the exact instruments varied by region and period. Some used leather thongs, others preferred the more brutal flagrung, a whip knotted with lead weights. Historians still argue whether these spectacles primarily served as legal deterrents or were early forms of mass entertainment. You edge forward along the marble edge of the forum, toes brushing against discarded oil lamp wicks and broken pottery shards. The plaza's center holds an oaken post, its surface grooved from centuries of lash marks. A freedman in a simple tunic tightens ropes around a trembling wretch's wrists, while a lictor stands by, hefting a fascia, a bundle of birch rods bound with iron. Fringe tidbit. Some executioners dipped their rods in vinegar mixed with bile before flogging, believing the stinging mixture hastened pain and prevented wounds from closing prematurely. Joke 1: You thought your last chiropractor session was painful. Try feeling vinegar-coated birch rods land on your bare back before breakfast. The crowd murmurs, a mix of curiosity, schadenfreude, and sympathy, as the magistrate raises his hand. You inhale the cool morning air tinged with wood smoke from nearby hearths and the faint tang of blood already seeping from the victim's shoulders. A hush falls, broken only by distant cawing of rooks perched on temple pediments. Begin, the magistrate intones in stentorian Latin. A cry pierces the air as the first lash falls. You flinch, the sound sharper than thunder in this stillness, each crack a punctuation marking the start of another day in Rome. Mainstream fact. Records from Tacitus and Juvenal describe how criminals received dozens of lashes, sometimes hundreds, depending on the severity of their crime, and surviving victims often bore scars visible for life. Yet some punishments included rest periods between whippings, ostensibly to lower mortality rates. Historians still argue whether these pauses were genuine humanitarian gestures or mere practical allowances for crowd spectacle. You notice the condemned skin reddening in rhythmic patterns, each strike a macabre metronome. Fringe tidbit: onlookers sometimes crumbled stale bread over wounds afterward, believing the crumbs absorbed blood and prevented infection, though medical treatises debated whether this compounded injuries by introducing dirt and mites. Joke 2: You gripe about getting red marks from tight belts, but imagine showing up at work covered in breadcrumb-dusted welts every morning. HR would never approve the dress code. As the flogging continues, you shift your weight, careful not to disturb your immaculate toga. A gentle breeze carries the rising moan of the punished man and the lictor's steady swing. You pinch your nose against the coppery scent of blood blending with dew-washed stone. Around you, spectators offer coins to passing water vendors, eager to rinse the blood from their tunics and avoid stains before the sun fully rises. Mainstream fact. Water vendors at public punishments flourished as entrepreneurs, carrying large amphorae to quickly wash away evidence and sell sweetened wine or diluted vinegar to stricken families. Historians still argue whether these vendors were tolerated for civic convenience or condemned as profiteers exploiting public suffering. You catch sight of a young woman, her face pale but determined, holding a small flask of oil. As the magistrate calls a brief halt, she kneels beside the victim and anoints the wounds, whispering prayers under her breath. Fringe tidbit: these volunteer healers, often associated with early temple charities, use spiced oils infused with myrrh or frankincense, believing the aromatic compounds eased pain and cleansed flesh, though debate endures on whether such remedies offered real antiseptic benefits or merely soothed the soul. Joke 3. You might stock essential oils for aromatherapy at home, but imagine lugging vials of myrrh through dawn crowds to treat whip wounds. Talk about self-care under pressure. The magistrate signals again, and the flogging resumes, rods landing in a relentless cadence. You lean against a column, heart racing, as the victim's cries fade into muffled gasps. The crowd watches in silence, some with averted eyes, others leaning forward for a better view. You sense the collective breath held until the final strike. Mainstream fact: after public lashings, some cities offered victims temporary asylum in shrines before forcing them to rebuild public works, an early form of restorative justice. Yet in practice, historians still argue whether these religious asylum traditions meaningfully protected the punished or merely delayed their return to forced labor. As the final rod falls, the crowd exhales. The victim collapses, legs buckling, and the freedman loosens the ropes. An attendant hands the woman healer a linen strip to wrap the back in a makeshift dressing. You watch as she tears a corner from her own tunic to bind the bloodied flesh, her hands steady despite the morning chill. You step forward, offering your water skin to rinse the victim's wounds, your gesture met with a weary nod. The water hisses as it touches raw flesh, steam momentarily clouding the air. Fringe tidbit: some communities tied ribbons around the rescued man's wrists afterward, marking forgiveness. These mercy ribbons sometimes became relics in temple treasuries. Joke 4: you complain about your fitness band's rash, but these mercy ribbons literally carry your bodily fluids in public humiliation. Talk about wearable trauma. With the ritual concluded, the magistrate pronounces sentence: the man will stand in stocks for an hour, then tend to street repairs for a week. The freedman helps him to his feet, and the crowd begins dispersing, murmuring about the day's bread baking schedules and bathhouse openings. You drip oil and vinegar off your fingertips while adjusting your toga's fold to hide any stray splatters. Mainstream fact: stocks in public labor were common follow-up punishments, combining humiliation with restitution. In some districts, magistrates recorded these sentences on tablets displayed in the forum. Historians still argue whether public record-keeping deterred repeat offenders or simply shamed the poor without reducing crime rates. You take a deep breath, tasting blood-tinted air mingled with the sweetness of dawn flowers blooming in nearby gardens, roses and violets offering a gentle counterpoint to the morning's harsh spectacle. The plaza stone warms beneath the sun's first rays, and you feel the city's pulse quicken with new energy. As you step off the plaza, you pass a vendor selling fresh bread rolls, the aroma so inviting you almost forget the flagellum's echo. You snag a loaf, breaking off a torn edge to nibble as you walk. The warm crumb soothes your stomach, a simple pleasure after such brutality. Joke 5: you might moan about your office coffee, but at least it doesn't taste like victory over a public flogging, though you'd probably need a stronger brew to shake off that scene. You sling the loaf in your satchel and glance back at the plaza. The post stands silent now, smeared with dried red that glistens in the morning light, a stark reminder that Rome's order relies on pain as much as on aqueducts and arches. With that image etched in your mind, you turn toward the Temple of Vesta to hear priestess' prophecies, another dawn duty proving that Rome's spiritual spectacle rivals its legal spectacles in drama and devotion. You slip through the marble gateway of the Temple of Vesta just as the morning light filters through smoke-tinted windows, the air thick with incense and anticipation. Vestal virgins in flowing white stolas move silently around the central hearth, their bare feet brushing mosaic floors depicting Pontifex Maximus figures in flame motifs. You probably won't survive a prophecy session without goosebumps, but here you are, drawn by whispered omens and the soft crackle of sacred fire. Remember that torchlight dance from the baths? This glow feels both warmer and more foreboding. You follow a narrow corridor lined with carved marble reliefs of Vestal rituals, each step echoing like a heartbeat. A robed priestess beckons you forward to a low stone bench beside a flickering brazier. Mainstream fact: Vestal virgins served for 30 years, tending Rome's sacred flame to ensure it never extinguished, a duty tied to the city's very survival. Historians still argue whether the Vestals' vow of chastity and seclusion was originally meant to pacify powerful goddesses or to control powerful young women. Fringe tidbit: some ancient manuscripts claim that Vestals once read the flame's color and height as omens. Taller, bluer flames signaled military victories, while sputtering embers warned of impending famine. Modern scholars debate whether these interpretations reflected genuine divination or were later additions by panicked officials trying to justify policy blunders. Joke 1: you may tut-tut over your morning weather app's ominous thunder warning, but at least your phone doesn't require a 25-year apprenticeship to decode flame flickers. The priestess gestures and drops a handful of sacred salt into an obsidian bowl. Her knuckles glow as sparks leap upward, illuminating her serene face. You lean in, inhaling the sharp tang of salt mixed with burning laurel leaves. You notice tiny ashmotes drifting like ghostly dancers in the shaft of light. She closes her eyes and murmurs in archaic Latin, voice low and melodic. You hear the word Inona, and your heart skips a beat. Grain supply, you think, linking back to Section 5's harvest scenes. Is this a good sign? Historians still argue whether omens influenced grain dole decisions or merely provided an excuse for shortages. Joke 2: you grumble about grain prices at the grocery store, but imagine having to plead with the gods, via salt and ash choreography, to keep your pantry stocked. Next, a second Vestal presents you with a polished bronze mirror and instructs you to gaze into the reflection of the hearth's flames. You crane over the rim, watching your face shift in the dancing glow. Fringe tidbit: a few Vestal accounts mention that priests sometimes carved tiny symbols into mirror backs to seed visions, effectively planting suggestions in a supplicant's mind. Critics argue this amounts to ancient cold reading rather than divine revelation. You blink thrice and squint. Does that shadow behind you resemble a wolf? You recall the story of Romulus and Remus nursed by a she-wolf. The image stirs something primal. Historians still argue whether such wolf motifs in prophecy sessions hark back to Rome's founding myth or were theatrical flourishes tacked on by Renaissance-era restorers. Joke 3: forget AI face filters, here you get full-on shape-shifting omens via mirror magic, complete with free branding as Wolf of the Hearth. The lead priestess raises a torch, tilting the flame toward a slender bronze rod inscribed with Sibylline verses. She traces her finger along the lines, pausing to translate. When the two rivers conjoin, the eagle shall feast upon Olive. You furrow your brow, trying to parse the puzzle. The Tiber and the Anio? An eagle? Olive? Something about peace or war? Fringe tidbit: some scholars claim the Sibylline books were originally Greek oracular texts adapted by Tarquin the Proud, though Romans vehemently insisted on purely Roman provenance. Mainstream fact: the Sibylline books were consulted by the Senate during crises, with envoys dispatched to purchase prophetic verses from a Cumaean Sibyl. Yet the original texts were lost in a fire in 83 BCE, and later translations may have been generated by politically motivated augurs. Historians still argue whether surviving fragments hold genuine prophetic value or reflect selective Senate propaganda. You tuck a loose strand of hair behind your ear as the Vestal hands you a small clay amphora of consecrated water, meant to ward off misfortune until dusk. You sip it cautiously, tasting faint notes of thyme and ash. The priestess nods solemnly. Proceed with caution at the city gate when Mercury ascends. You blink in confusion. Mercury, the planet? The god of commerce? The messenger? You might need to check tonight's sky chart or postpone your next market visit. Joke 4. You grumble about calendar apps sending cryptic lunar warnings, but at least you don't have to report to an all-female priesthood for personalized astrological directives. Stepping back, you tuck the amphora into your satchel next to garum and olive jars, the oddest blend of culinary and mystical tools. The Vestals bow in unison, their white veils fluttering like startled doves. You bow back, aware that this intimacy with Rome's sacred hearth carries weight beyond polite ceremony. Before you depart, the lead priestess whispers one final admonition: trust not the silver-tongued stranger in the forum's shadow. You glance over your shoulder, eyes narrowing. Was that the orator from Section 2? Fringe tidbit: some prophecy handbook excerpts advise scribes to insert generic stranger warnings to keep petitioners returning for follow-up sessions. Scholars still argue whether such tropes undermine genuine divination or kept temple coffers full. Joke 5. You worry about phishing emails, but imagine getting a mystical memo about untrustworthy strangers in real life. No spam filter can save you from that. Exiting the temple, you inhale the cool morning breeze scented with cypress and incense smoke. You feel both enlightened and unnerved, clutching portent-laden salt and water as you tread the stone steps. Ahead lies the horizon of fresh construction, Roman roads stretching like arteries across the empire. So keep that warning tucked at the back of your mind. You shoulder your toolkit, a hammer, chisel, and leather satchel of nails, and fall in step alongside a century of legionaries striding over freshly laid gravel. The sun beats down as you trudge along the earth, each foot in your hobnailed sandal pressing into the compacted layers of stone and sand. You probably won't survive today's march without a blister or two. Remember those Godash baths in Section 4? You'll crave that soak tonight. Mainstream fact: Roman roads like the nearby Via Appia were engineered in multiple strata: statumen, large stones, rudus, smaller rubble, nucleus, sand mixed with lime, and summum dorsum, paved stones, creating a durable surface that carried legions and merchants alike. Historians still argue whether soldiers laid every layer themselves or if civilian contractors handled the bulk work under military supervision. You lift your hammer to break a stubborn rock, sweat trickling down your back. A grizzled centurion paces beside you, barking measurements to sentries marking distances with a groma, those cross-shaped surveying tools you glimpsed near the aqueduct. Fringe tidbit: some surveyors inscribed cursed tablets beneath road milestones, invoking spirits to punish anyone who tampered with the markers, though modern epigraphers wonder if these curses were ever taken seriously or just a fun scribble. Joke 1. You moan about GPS rerouting you, but imagine if your map app spat out threats against road vandals instead of recalculating. As you tamp down a bed of crushed limestone, the clink of metal armor mingles with distant hammer strikes. Legionaries chant a rhythmic cadence, 1 2 3 4, their voices buoying your morale. You recall the tiny bells on sickles from Section 5. Here, some soldiers tie leather tassels to their gear so comrades can spot them in dust clouds. Historians still argue whether these tassels served practical signaling or were simply decorative. The scent of pine resin drifts from freshly hewn curbstones awaiting installation. You grab a chisel and notch the edge, preparing to seat the stone flush against its neighbor. Fringe tidbit: Quarry workers sometimes carved hidden symbols, like small hearts or initials, into curbed stones as personal signature marks, a medieval-style graffiti centuries before its time. Joke 2. You complain about lack of credit for your group project, but at least you didn't secretly carve your name into a city's roadway, public kudos guaranteed. At midday, you pause under a makeshift awning as an attendant ladles out barley water flavored with honey, a welcome reprieve from the grit in your throat. You sip slowly, recalling Section 6's aqueduct lottery tokens. This water's free, but you still offer a polite nod to the man serving it, as if he holds the key to your hydration. Rested, you resume work, aligning a flat basalt slab beside its partner. The stones fit snugly, echoing a satisfying click as you test the surface with a practiced step. Mainstream fact: Roman engineers emphasized tight stone joints to minimize water infiltration and frost damage, contributing to roads that lasted centuries. Yet you note a tiny gap channeling rain runoff toward the drainage ditches you saw near Section 9 sewer lines, proof that even perfect paving needed water management. Historians still argue whether early maintenance crews prioritized patch repairs or simply let nature handle erosion. Your elbow brushes against a fellow laborer, a veteran centurion from Germania, who nods curtly before adjusting his Calighi straps. The bright iron studs jingle softly on his sandals, a callback to Section 2's painted chariot will ice, different noise, same purpose, keep spirits high. Fringe tidbit. Some centurions glued glass beads onto their sandal soles to produce a cheerful clatter, believed to ward off marauding wolves on night marches, though most walked barefoot once camp was set. Joke 3. You think your sneakers squeak is annoying, but try building an empire road with sandals that squeal louder than festival trumpets. Afternoon light flares off distant milestones marking each Roman mile, phalia carved into stone, their numerals worn but legible. You dust one off, revealing a Latin inscription dedicating the segment to Emperor Trajan. A scribe leans in, copying it onto a wax tablet for official records. Fringe tidbit: some scribes added flourish lines around imperial names to make them appear larger and more impressive, an ancient form of clickbait. Mainstream fact: milestones also listed the original road builder and distance to Rome, serving both practical and propagandistic roles. Many survive today along surviving Veii. Historians still argue whether the propaganda aspect outweighed the utilitarian purpose in citizens' minds. As shadows lengthen, you place the final paving stone for today's section, stepping back to admire the seamless path stretching toward the horizon. Your muscles ache, but a sense of pride swells. This road will carry grain ships you saw in Section 5's harvest fields and legions to frontiers you've only heard about. A bugle sounds as supper rations arrive. Coarse bread, salted fish, and spiced lupin beans. You pop a bean between your teeth, recalling Section 7 snails tasting of earth. This bean tastes faintly of anise and sand. Fringe tidbit: some camp cooks mixed in crushed snail shells to boost calcium content, though most legionaries spat them out and blamed gastrointestinal distress on enemy herbs. You chew thoughtfully, gazing at the road you helped build. The centurion beside you slaps your shoulder and tosses you a fig from his personal reserves, the same glossy fig stuffed with cheese you bargained for in Section 2's forum commute. You crack a grin and share the moment, comrades united by sweat, stones, and shared spoils. Joke 4. You rant about Zoom coffee breaks, but nothing beats a midday fig passed along after hammering stones under the sun. Office camaraderie, ancient edition. Night falls, and torches line the newly built road, sputtering in a gentle breeze. You wipe ash and sweat from your brow, then retrieve your amphora of consecrated water from Section 11's prophecy session, splashing a bit onto your hands to banish dust and curse tablets alike. Historians still argue whether ritual water cleansed both body and mind, but you feel a fleeting calm. You step onto the clean stones, feeling the subtle rise and fall of each layer beneath your soles. The road hums with potential caravans to far-flung provinces, messages for emperors, travelers seeking fresh horizons. And you are part of that promise, your footsteps lost among countless others who will tread this path long after you. Before you retreat to camp, you pause and trace a finger along the engraved emperor's name, a silent handshake across centuries. Then, with one last glance at the starlit road you helped shape, you turn toward tomorrow's dawn tasks. Perhaps inspecting the next aqueduct outlet or sampling morning loaves at the Forum. But whichever comes first, rest assured, this road you built will carry stories as enduring as Rome itself. You return to the sunlit Forum Square, its marble columns gleaming under the late morning haze, and step quietly into a hush of murmured voices. Senators in crisp white togas circle under bronze equestrian statues, their whispered debates more intoxicating than garum in a tavern. You probably won't survive these gossip circles without raising an eyebrow, but here you are, leaning against a carved pillar and tuning in. Remember those painted chariot wheels from Section 2? Their tiny eyes didn't see half as much as your discreet glance now. A tall senator strides past, his tunic hem trimmed in purple, a sign of senatorial rank, his voice low. The grain dole must be curtailed, or our coffers will drain by next harvest. Mainstream fact, the Annona grain dole, established by Gaius Gracchus in 123 BCE, provided free or subsidized wheat to eligible citizens, shaping Roman politics for centuries. Yet you catch another senator countering in a clipped whisper, "Let the people eat stale bread before they revolt." Historians still argue whether the dole stabilized urban unrest or fostered dependency, undermining civic virtue. You edge closer to a cluster leaning near a statue of Augustus, its bronze patina spotted with bird droppings, nature's commentary on empire. Fringe tidbit. Some forumgoers hung miniature wax masks of unpopular politicians from statue pedestals at night, hoping to embarrass them. Archaeologists occasionally unearth melted wax fragments near foundations. Joke 1, you complain about spoilers on social media, but ancient Romans invented lively culture by hanging wax caricatures around the city, no subscription needed to get the dirt. A portly patrician glances your way, then lowers his voice to confide that a certain praetor has been secretly funding gladiator schools with state coffers. You suppress a grin, public spectacles mean big business. Mainstream fact, praetors oversaw both judicial matters and public games, often funding events from personal wealth to curry favor. Elite sponsorship became expected for political career advancement. Historians still argue whether such private funding improved civic life or simply entrenched oligarchic influence. You tiptoe to another circle clustered near the Temple of Saturn, or a group debates whispers of the Vestal Virgin's chastity vows being broken. The topic draws gasps from younger citizens. Fringe tidbit, rumors once circulated that one Vestal smuggled letters to a beloved under her stola, using stylus-tipped hairpins to jot messages on wax tablets. Though official records dismiss these tales as slander. Joke 2, you think office gossip gets messy? Imagine one wrong rumor about your boss and suddenly you're the lead story on temple rumor walls, sticky like spilled molasses. Your ears catch mention of a foreign envoy from Parthia, recently sighted sneaking into the Curia Cornelia after dusk. You step into the light, nodding at a senator who snorts, he trades silk for secrets. Mainstream fact. Parthian embassies often arrived bearing silk and spices, negotiating treaties and espionage alike. Silk imports were so valuable they rivaled gold thread in the emperor's robes. Yet whispers persist that trade envoys doubled as spies, and scholars still debate the true cost of silk diplomacy. You inhale the scent of scorched rosemary from a nearby vendor's brazier, a herbal barrier against lingering sewage smells from Section 9's drains. Fringe tidbit. Some senators carried pomanders of crushed rosemary en route to ward off both bad odors and ill-intentioned whispers, though critics claimed the fragrance only masked rotten reputations. Joke 3. You moan when someone spoils your favorite show, but here, senators brought literal stink bombs of gossip and scented sachets just to survive it. A scholar in linen robes steps forward, quoting a recent edict: "No senator may publicly denounce another without evidence before the people." He rolls his eyes, murmuring that this hardly stopped back-alley accusations. You lean in, catching that evidence was rumored to be clandestine letters smuggled via freedmen. Mainstream fact: the Lex Cornelia de Majestate of 81 BCE criminalized slander against Rome's dignity, requiring formal charges rather than public jeers. Historians still argue whether this law curbed defamatory gossip or simply drove it underground. You drift toward a quieter niche by the rostra platform, where artisans sell wax tablets etched with today's scandals. A vendor offers you a slip reading: "Senator Antonius's hidden villa boasts a private shrine to Bacchus, imagine the nightly revels." You slip a coin across the stall and fold the tablet into your tunic. Fringe tidbit: some rumor mongers sold insider tablets at steep prices, claiming divination techniques revealed secret actions. Many buyers later swore they lost both denarii and dignity. Joke 4. You gripe about overpriced tabloids, but Roman rumor tablets cost more than a night at the tavern and left you tipsy on scandal instead of wine. A group of women in Stoli gather by a fountain, whispering that the prefect's wife has been seen clandestinely meeting a Greek poet. You hover nearby, watching their animated gestures. Mainstream fact: elite women sometimes sponsored literary circles in private gardens, patronizing poets who recited verses mixing politics and passion. Yet their involvement in public life remained unofficial. Historians still debate whether poetic salons offered genuine influence or were mere social pretense. You recall Section 7's tavern pastries and sip water from your amphora of consecrated water, the salt's tang reminding you of prophecy salt in Section 11. You clear your throat and drift closer to catch more. A senator's son brags he bribed the custodian of the Sibylline books to insert flattering verses, an act likely punishable by exile if exposed. Fringe tidbit: some bribes involved rare purple-dyed textiles, turned into ceremonial cloaks for augurs. Few could verify delivery of the original verses. Joke 5. You cringe at pay-to-win games, but bribing temple scribes for personalized prophecies sounds like microtransactions on Divine DLC. No refund policy guaranteed. As the sun arcs overhead, the gossip swirls like honey stirred in wine. You tuck your wax tablet away, mind buzzing with secrets, illicit affairs, covert bribes, subverted grain supplies, and clandestine prophecies. Each whispered rumor is a thread in the tapestry of power, fragile, sticky, and often unverifiable. Yet despite the risk of being labeled a sycophant, you can't resist tasting each morsel. You step back into the open forum, passing under Augustus's statue, its bronze gaze as inscrutable as any senator's poker face. The marble floor feels warm beneath your sandals, a silent reminder of every footstep echoing through history. You recall that post-flogging bread from Section 10 and slip a small crumb from your satchel into your mouth, simple sustenance after a feast of scandal. The forum hums with life. Merchants in one corner, philosophers in another, and here, the most tantalizing spectacle, politics by whisper. You straighten your toga's valise, smoothing the fold as though every crease shields you from overheard secrets. Before we depart for the final wind down, take one last breath of this fragrant, rumor-laced air. Remember those miniature wax masks, those saffron-tinctured fish sauces, and now, these voices drifting around marble and bronze. Each tale, true or not, shapes the city as much as its aqueducts and roads. You linger by the flickering glow of an oil lamp as dusk settles over Rome, the sky deepening into indigo and the chatter of day dwindling into soft echoes. Suddenly, a resonant blast from a cornu horn rolls through the alleyways, a summons to curfew. You probably won't make it home unscathed if you ignore that call. Imagine a centurion's baton tapping on your shoulder. But here you are, toes scraping loose gravel as you hurry down winding lanes. Remember those oil lamplit mosaic floors in the baths? Now they're replaced by wavering lantern pools casting giant, dancing shadows on crumbling walls. Mainstream fact: Augustus formalized Rome's nightly curfew, the Vigilia Urbana, to maintain order and guard against fire and crime, designating watchmen, vigiles, to patrol 18 regions with leather buckets and hooks for pulling burning timbers. Historians still argue whether this system primarily served firefighting needs or was a mechanism to suppress insurrection under the guise of safety. You slip past a shuttered wine shop whose wooden doors bear fresh hammer marks, evidence of nocturnal shutters hammered into place. A lone guard in a broad-brimmed Gallia helmet nods as you pass. Fringe tidbit. Some homeowners carve small holes in their shutters to peer out during curfew, creating clandestine peepholes that let them spy on neighbors' lamplight patterns. Archaeologists found tiny circular cuts in several Ostia homes. Joke 1: you think modern window security bars are intrusive, but ancient Romans took peephole view to a whole new level. No privacy, just peep shows. The street narrows into a tunnel of stacked crates and barrels, oil lamps perched precariously on ledges. You bump shoulders with a baker, his apron streaked with ash from Section 10's early punishment fires. He grips a lantern and calls, "Last call for bread," before scurrying on. You inhale the scent of warm crust, a welcome reminder of dawn's post-flogging loaf, then press on toward your insula. The cornice sounds again, this time recessed from the forum, warning that gates will soon close. You round a corner and glimpse the Foro Borgio's rusty iron gate slamming shut with a resonant clang. Fringe tidbit: gatekeepers sometimes collected tolls in kind olive jars or small coins to let important travelers slip through after curfew. Official records mention occasional black market bribes, though it's unclear how widespread the practice was. Mainstream fact: Rome's city gates, part of the Servian Wall and later the Aurelian fortifications, generally closed at the 7th hour after dusk, roughly 9 p.m., though seasonal adjustments applied longer summer hours. Historians still argue whether these closures genuinely prevented crime or merely inconvenienced merchants and pilgrims. You quicken your pace, sandaled feet echoing on cobblestones, weaving between statues that catch lantern light in their marble faces. A troupe of theater apprentices huddles in a doorway, clutching scrolls of tragedy and farce, hoping to slip home unnoticed. You recall Section 13's gossip circles. Tonight, whispers have turned to curfew rumors. Some say watchmen seize lanterns from violators, leaving them stranded in total darkness until morning. Joke 2: you moan when your phone dies, but no battery replacement will save you if a watchman snatches your lamp. Suddenly you're playing midnight hide-and-seek in pitch black. As you pass under an archway, you spot a small shrine to Vesper, goddess of evening, candles burnt low. A nearby tomb guard, once a freedman of naval rank, offers you a quick nod of blessing. Fringe tidbit. Some Romans believed that lighting a candle at Vesper's shrine granted safe passage through curfew hours. However, Surviving inscriptions suggest these candles were more likely votive remnants than magical talismans. You reach a crossroad where two roads meet, the Via Sacra and the cobbled lane leading to your district. The intersection is patrolled by two vigilas leaning on hooked poles, ready to pull down runaway campaign banners or extinguish rogue fires. One grins, beckoning you forward with a crooked finger. You hasten through, mindful of shadowy corners where pickpockets once lurked, stealing coins from evening worshippers. Mainstream fact: the vigilas served both as firefighters and night watch, formed under Augustus and later expanded by Nero to include 7 cohorts of 1,000 men each. They carried hooks, scopi, to tear down burning wood and man watchtowers across the city. Historians still argue whether the vigila's dual role diluted their effectiveness in both duties or forged a broadly skilled urban force. Your path turns toward a row of insulae, multi-story tenements whose upper floors have few windows and no private latrines. You recall Section 9's sewer floods, now quiet beneath the street. Lantern light streams from lower windows but dims to black at higher levels, where only small peepholes betray life inside. Fringe tidbit: some insula dwellers tied scraps of cloth soaked in perfumed oils to their railings to camouflage latrine odors, a practice reportedly tolerated until complaints from wealthier tenants. Joke 3: you gripe about apartment living's shared hallways, but at least you don't need to mask communal sewage smells with lavender-soaked rags. Talk about scented real estate. A second cornu blast warns you that the final watches have begun. You dash up a narrow staircase, each step uneven and worn smooth by countless souls ascending since your bathhouse visit. Your sandals squeak against stone, you pause to catch your breath, pressing your back against the cool wall. Inside your insula's common hallway, oil lamps flicker in wall sconces set at regular intervals. You navigate past neighbors. A weaver hauling baskets of yarn, a child clutching a wooden doll under a patchwork blanket, and a matron humming a lullaby you half recognize from Section 15's eventual lull. Mainstream fact: insulae construction prioritized maximizing rental income, often compromising structural integrity. Tacitus reports several tragic collapses, leading to building regulations under Augustus limiting their height to about 70 Roman feet. Historians still argue whether these regulations were enforced citywide or only in elite districts. You reach your door, a simple wooden slab reinforced with iron straps. Inside, lantern light dances across a narrow room crowded with a cot, a small table, and you hope, a fresh sponge on a stick tucked by your wash basin. Fringe tidbit: some tenants used sponges harvested from the Tiber, believing river sponges were more absorbent. Skeptics claimed the practice invited unwanted microbes. Joke 4: you complain about disinfecting sponges every week, but imagine squeezing river-gathered sponges over your face nightly. Good luck with that. You close the latch just as the final cornu blast fades, signaling the city's descent into guarded silence. From your window, you watch the vigilas extinguishing street lamps with long poles, leaving flickers of light like dying embers against obsidian sky. A solitary owl hoots from a nearby rooftop, and you feel both sheltered and exposed. Inside your insula, you're safe. Outside, the city's pulse softens to a whisper. Mainstream fact: nighttime watch duties extended until dawn's first light, with vigilas relieving each other at set intervals. Their barracks doubled as watch stations, complete with small shrines to Vulcan for protection against fire. Historians still argue whether these barracks served effectively as rapid response hubs or were too dispersed for timely intervention. You sink onto your cot and gaze toward the narrow window overlooking an inner courtyard where lantern embers drift like fireflies. The lingering scent of mingled olive oil, charred wood, and distant incense from Section 11's temple still drifts on the night air. You cradle your lantern, ensuring the flame's steady glow. Joke 5: you dread flashlight batteries dying, But at least your modern torch doesn't risk being snatched by night watch, though it might still fail when you need it most. You lie back on the coarse mattress, listening to the muffled calls of vigilas in the street below and the gentle rustle of breeze through open shutters. As sleep beckons, you recall every horn blast, shutter hammer, and whispered curfew warning, each a reminder that even in paradise, order requires vigilant guardians. You close your eyes, the lamp's glow softening as you drift, ready for one final chapter where distant temple bells lull you into deeper sleep. You sink onto the edge of your simple cot, the coarse fibers of your mattress pressing against your legs as you rise and step toward the narrow window of your insula room. Outside, the city's roar has dwindled to a gentle murmur, broken only by the distant peal of temple bells echoing across tiled rooftops. You lean forward, resting your arms on the windowsill, and let the cool night breeze stir the folds of your toga still draped over your shoulders. Remember the bathhouse steam from section 4? Now that same steam seems worlds away as the city exhales into slumber. A soft clang from a far-off shrine punctuates the air. Bells known as tintinnabula once hung outside temples and homes to invite good fortune and drive off malevolent spirits. Mainstream fact: archaeologists have unearthed bronze tintinnabula in Pompeii's Villa of Mysteries, suggesting these wind chimes were widespread by the 1st century CE. Yet here, in Rome's evening hush, you hear only a solitary tone, carried on the breeze like a distant lullaby. Historians still argue whether these bells served chiefly apotropaic functions or were ornamental status symbols. Beneath the window ledge, a mosaic fragment juts out, a leftover tile from the bathhouse foyer where you scrubbed goat ash in section 4. Fringe tidbit: some bathhouse mosaics incorporated tiny embedded bells that rang whenever someone paced across, alerting attendants to overflow or unruly bathers. Critics contended the jingles were more nuisance than necessity. You smile at the thought, at least your evening routine lacks surprise jingles, though you wouldn't mind a discreet chime to signal bedtime. The night air carries echoes of earlier scenes, the forum's tinkling gossip tablets, section 13. The clatter of roadwork tools on Via Appia, section 12, and the distant hum of blessed water vendors from section 10's punishment square. Each memory twines like garland in your mind, reminding you of the city's pulse, driven by human hands and engineered marvels alike. The scents of olive oil, pine resin, and faint incense tumble through your senses, a perfumed tapestry woven from dawn's communal latrines to dusk's sacred hearth. You lean back, letting the cool plaster press against your palms. Your lantern sits unlit on a bedside table, its final flicker extinguished with the last vestiges of daylight. Jokes from the day swirl in your thoughts. You've borne goat ash baths, gladiator wheat fields, and fermented dormice dinners, yet here, enveloped in the hush of midnight, you feel oddly triumphant. If you thought modern bedtime stories were tame, imagine yours. A sponge-on-a-stick saga punctuated by flag-rum whip cracks and curfew cornu calls. Your eyelids grow heavy as the temple bell fades into silence. You slide a hand along the windowsill, fingertips tracing cool stone marred by centuries of weather and bustling crowds. Here at the apex of your journey, you taste both relief and wonder, relief that another day's trials have passed, and wonder at the intricate tapestry of Rome's life, where baths, markets, and roadways all converge beneath this same sky. You rise and slip from the window ledge, adjusting your tunic and smoothing the folds of your toga's vallis. One last glance through the glassless frame reveals lantern-lit courtyards where shadows pool like ink, and distant temple columns glow faintly against a star-flecked canvas. You close the shutter gently, sealing out the night chill while preserving the echo of distant bells in your mind. Word count: 1008. Wind down: 300.